My name's Olivia Cohen. I'm the Energy and Environment reporter from the Gazette. I'll be moderating today's session on biosecurity and food production. Just a few notes before we dive into this session a little bit more. We will have two panelists sitting on this session, Roger Main and Aaron Lehman. We're still waiting on one panelist to join us, and due to just a few technical difficulties, Roger will have his camera off for this meeting. But this is our ninth year of Iowa Ideas. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome. Iowa Ideas is an annual conference put on by the Gazette that explores topics that are important to Iowans all across the state. So this is the first day of 2 days of having discussions about pressing issues, different topics that face Iowans all across the state. Before we get into a few questions for our panelists, or Roger for now, I just want to say a quick thank you to ICT Midwest for sponsoring this session. Through ICT's Midwest's support and sponsorship of these sessions, they help make sure that Iowa Ideas is free for all Iowans to register and engage with. So thank you to them. Before we dive into some questions to start us off, we'll start just by introducing our panelists for now, then loop in Aaron when he comes in. Roger, why don't you take us through a little bit about you, your background, and what's led you to this panel today?
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. So my name is Roger Main, and I serve as a professor and then the director of the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab at Iowa State University. And so the Iowa State University Veterinary Diagnostic Lab is the only full service and fully accredited veterinary diagnostic lab in the state of Iowa. And then we're the state's official veterinary diagnostic lab. And so we work very closely in partnership with both our industry and then state and federal partners. And so we work very closely with the Iowa Department of Agriculture and the USDA as it relates to supporting any sort of program or regulatory type disease surveillance as part of our mission.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much. And just to get the ball rolling here with the conversation, for some of our attendees who might not be as well versed in what biosecurity is and what its role is in food production, would you mind just walking us through the basics of what this practice refers to, and what are some of the basics that Iowans should know about?
Sure. So biosecurity, I would kind of summarize it as like a suite of practices and activities that really center on efforts that mitigate the spread of disease into and within populations of animals or humans. I guess you could be too, but in the scope of food production and animal production, it's largely around practices that occur both on farm and off farm that collectively aim to mitigate the spread of disease into and between populations of animals or farm site premises, you might say.
Gotcha. Well, thank you. Just getting into a little bit more of the specifics here, various biosecurity issues have been in the news in, recent years due to infections like the avian or bird influenza. But what biosecurity measures are in place to reduce the spread of diseases like that?
Right. And so, in today's world, most commercial poultry and egg production are the birds are contained within under roof, you might say. They're within a physical structure that would then have some sort of containment, and often like say bird netting or things like that. And that was a really big move and change. I mean, over decades, that the animals, essentially birds, were moved inside to keep them protected so that they didn't have direct exposure to wild birds, or the wild birds, because the thing you hear about with avian influenza is a virus, and then it's actively circulating in the wild bird population. And then so when we have these, so the whole idea is we're trying to keep that virus that's actively, in the wild bird population from entering the commercial or domestic bird population. And so, like, one example of like a core biosecurity related activity that happens is that the birds are housed inside. And, that's a really foundational thing for helping to protect them from having direct contact with wild birds, as an example of kind of a core biosecurity principle in today's both poultry and egg production. And one other thing I would say about biosecurity is, so and typically we think about biosecurity in the framework of keeping diseases out, where you're trying to protect a given population of animals from a disease coming in from the outside. And another key part of biosecurity also relates to biocontainment, meaning where you're trying to say, if it does happen to break through and get into a population, how do you keep it from spreading from that flock or herd, if it's a livestock, from getting out to affect other neighboring populations. That's another key component of biosecurity. Bless you.
Thank you. No, but thank you for that. I'm curious, when you're mentioning, especially poultry and birds kind of shifting to be under roof or in more contained settings, how does that contribute to the spread of disease as well? Does that pose any risks when they're more contained?
Well, it actually, again, I go back. It's a core principle of that goes into helping protect them from that direct exposure to the wild birds. And if you think back years ago, say, and I'm not sure exactly when all that transition took place, but like up until I think the 1970s, maybe something like this, is that there was like commercial turkey production in the upper Midwest was largely outside, meaning the birds were outside, they were on the ground in the fields, they had little huts they would go to get out of the weather, and so on and so forth. But again, that all changed with time, and that was all really driven by to helping making the birds healthier. And then in avian flu was not in no small way was one key part of that drive to get the birds inside to help protect them from the wild birds.
Okay. Well, thank you. Just to back up for a moment here, our other panelist just joined us. So, Aaron, if you don't mind just taking a moment, would you mind just sharing a little bit about the work you do, your background, and what's led you to this panel today?
Sure. So my name is Aaron Lehman. I farm here in central Iowa. I grow corn, soybeans, oats, and hay, and I'm president of the Iowa Farmers Union. And we are constantly being reminded about how important this issue is to our farmers and to our whole Iowa ag economy. And in addition to the issues that you've been working through before I joined, I also kind of wanted to mention, that I was trying to do everything we can to increase our efforts in the local and regional food system. We're very proud of the food we grow here in Iowa that's meant to feed Iowans and our communities and our institutions in our communities. But we can't forget the food security issues we have there are extremely important as well. And so we've been concentrating on some of those efforts to reach those producers so that they can understand the importance of food security and food safety issues. And how that impacts directly their consumers who are eating good Iowa local food.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I kind of focusing a little bit more on the biosecurity aspect of all this for now.
Right.
In terms of how some of these diseases circulate that are biosecurity threats, and thinking about the avian flu, for example, how big of a threat are these diseases in terms of food production in Iowa and just farm operations across the state? How big are those threats?
Well, they're growing, and I think Roger hinted at some of the reasons why we think they're growing. Production models are changing, and with that, the biosecurity threats are changing with that. So, where we used to see threats that would impact a single farm that was among many farms in a community or a county. When we have a biosecurity threat on just one operation, it can threaten a large portion of the production, and it can be very challenging to deal with the issue at that scale. So, one of the reasons that we want to promote a diversified agriculture is that we can build a more resilient system and have that risk spread. But we certainly know that that biosecurity issues are a growing issue, and a single problem can impact a massive amount of the entire industry of any particular state, like it certainly does here in Iowa.
One thing I would add to that, Olivia, is that for providing some context, is that the current HPAI, or high path avian influenza, threat and impact that's happening today, it really, this go around originated actually in 2022. Okay, so it's been circulating in North America, and this particular strain, that's the predominant avian influenza strain that's been impacting the birds. It's been impacting the world's birds, especially in the northern hemisphere, on and off for the past almost 3 years now. And that's kind of a bit, I would say, unprecedented from getting through multiple migration seasons with the bug still causing problems. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it's very much a global issue, meaning it's unquestionably impacting us here in the U.S., in Iowa, in the U.S., and North America. And it's also been a very significant issue with our allies, you might say, in Western Europe. Very similar. And then, of course, in Asia, which has been more of a chronic thing there, just a different model and risk there. But in our area of the world, but it's a novelty that it's like this thing hasn't just gone away like in one season. We had an outbreak of avian influenza in 2015, and that was kind of the first time you might say in a more modern era where there was large scale, HPAI, as mentioned, large commercial operations being impacted, so on and so forth, in a major way. And that was kind of a one season event. And what's about this go around has been its chronicity of it. Not quite, it hasn't been going away. And it was interesting. It was in 2024, we went through and it wasn't really impacted too much. And it's one thing that's correlates very well. We're fortunate to have actually the state of Iowa's wildlife veterinarian associated with the Iowa DNR is actually housed out of the veterinary diagnostic lab at Iowa State, Dr. Rachel Rudin. We're very fortunate to have her there. And as part of that, she plays a role of surveilling the high path avian influenza activity in the wild birds that are in Iowa, moving through Iowa or living in Iowa. And there's a very high correlation to when we see the activity identifications in the wild birds before we see it. And so like just the last, I think it's been probably the last 3 to 4 weeks now, we've gone, long periods with, no detections in the wild birds. And about 3 or 4 weeks ago now is we started to see this boom, boom, boom in the wild birds. And so we know that, then that the risk and so on with this migration season that's just really getting started into Iowa. Those risks are very high at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Staying on this track of avian influenza for another minute, I'm curious, with these migration patterns going up for these birds and these risks being higher, as you said, should Iowans expect to see, more flocks affected going forward as we go towards the winter months? Should not only Iowans, but people across the country as well expect to see higher egg prices or result effects to our food production going forward?
Well, the risks are certainly high. It's already started in states around us, north of us. And I think you'll see a press release that's just coming out today by our Iowa Department of Agriculture, and it's been principally thus far. It's been in our surrounding states has been some commercial turkey, commercial turkey, and it's really been the operations that have been most vulnerable, at least on the commercial scale operations, have largely been commercial turkey, and then commercial egg layer, and in the for whatever sets of reasons, and probably unquestionably impacted by the macro environment of the Missouri flyway, but that Missouri flyway of I call it upper Midwest, so northern Iowa, western Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, up into Minnesota, like that flyway has been unquestioned, and there's a fair bit of turkey production there, as well as egg layers. Iowa's the number one egg laying state. Unquestionably, that area of the U.S. has been impacted the most over this period of time.
Do you have anything to add on that, Aaron?
No, I think I don't have too much to add, except that I think we're beginning to understand how these issues might not be a one-timer and go away. And I think we hit on some of those issues. And that's affecting the entire food system, right? I think we're trying to come to grips with how to deal with events that are not just one-time events, but are going to offer us ongoing challenges. So the challenge to us then is how do we build a more resilient food system to build into that understanding of the threats that are there, how we can make a system that is able to withstand than just a one-time event.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good segue into another question I have for you both. In terms of building a more resilient system, both in Iowa and regionally, first, how resilient is our system as of now? And secondly, what could be done to strengthen that system to make it more resilient?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And, it certainly we don't have to go back very far in our lives to understand how important a resilient system is. Have we taken those lessons that we learned from that and implemented them? I think some have, but there are many things that we still need to do to build in more resiliency into our system. And some lessons we're having to relearn as well. For instance, our system is here in Iowa and in certainly in all parts of the country are reliant on a labor force, and a lot of our labor force issues are even more serious today than they have been in the past. We have large segments of our labor sector that haven't felt secure in their position, and it's those labor issues are coming, yes, through the food system, and yes, through our supply systems, but they're meeting all the way down on the farm. So one of the challenges that we have to building a more resilient food system is valuing a diverse labor force and making improvements to our immigration policies that value that diversity in labor force. We're dealing with a very outdated, very expensive H-2A system, for instance, that makes it harder for us to build off some of the strengths that we have in Iowa with a diverse labor system and on our farms and in our food system. And that's really being challenged now. So we're having even more challenges to our food security through our labor issues, in addition to the biosecurity issues that are front and center.
One thing I would just add to Aaron's comments was about, this questions about more resiliency in the food system and how are we, continuing to evolve, and unquestionably the systems continue to evolve with the challenges at hand, and specifically on this HPAI situation and its recurring nature, of like, well, it isn't behaving like a one and done like maybe it had historically.
Right.
Has been that the topic of vaccination is one that's very much in the part of a larger conversation that's happening, within the poultry and egg industries and across segments of that industry, in partnership with USDA, about is there a role, is there a need for, and is there a role for some potentially targeted use of vaccine that could be done in a responsible way that may enhance the resiliency of the system that we have, but be done in a way that could mitigate negative impacts on trade, which is the primary driver of why it's not done today. Okay, because it's internationally has been historically when there's vaccination involved, then that can have some negative impacts on the ability to trade, because it's like, well, are you masking the disease? That's the fear, and unquestionably that's an ongoing conversation that's happening today at many levels, again, within the poultry industries itself, across sectors, because within the poultry industry there's various sectors. There's turkey, that's a sector. There's egg production, that's a sector. There's broiler, and each of them have differences, about how much are they being affected by this AI, and how much are they dependent on trade. What does that mean to them? And so I think it's part of how is it being accepted maybe globally. One thing that was done just this past spring summer was that there was ducks in France, where a vaccine was allowed, essentially, and had a very positive impact on their situation. And there were some others that said, well, okay, we'll take that from areas or regions that are not vaccinated, as an example. So that is a thing that has historically it's not been a thing. It's a complicated situation. There's no easy answers for any of that. But that is an example of a conversation that's happening at a large level to weigh the pros and cons about what opportunities there may be in that, depending on how this HPAI situation continues to evolve.
Roger hit on a great point. Farmers are going through a lot of upset in the trade world right now, and where that's going to settle out, I think, is yet to be determined. But finding ways to trade agreements where the benefits come all the way back to the farm, all the way back to the field, all the way back to our barn, is going to be extremely important. And there's a lot yet to be determined yet, because right now we have some trade chaos where there are a lot of issues that aren't typically trade related, not typically farm related, that are being interjected. But that doesn't mean we'll be there always. And when we start getting to the point where we can actually deal with those trade issues in a way that impacts our farm economy and the issues on our farm, will those impacts make sense for producers on the ground? So these trade agreements are extremely important in prioritizing those issues. So not only are we trading animals and we're getting some good activity going on in the trade world, but the conditions of that trade that can really have a positive impact all the way down to the farm is going to be extremely important. And Roger highlighted some of those.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. With the conversation around vaccines, I'm curious, could there be vaccines for animals and poultry to mitigate some of these biosecurity risks in the foreseeable future? Or are we still pretty far away from this?
I would say there's probably a lot of work to be done, and again, a lot of work to be done and conversations to be had that are certainly outside of my scope, but I know though they are occurring actively, again, amongst industry leaders within the poultry and egg industries and across those sectors, and in cooperation with USDA and to see where that conversation takes us. And again, that would be outside of my scope of day to day, other than I know that they're active conversations. And I do know also that the USDA, that was this summer, announced they're putting forth a large research initiative in around this HPAI. That's called the HPAI, or like Grand Challenge. That's certainly components of that involve evaluating the alternative vaccine technologies that could potentially be part of an improved solution.
Thank you. Kind of shifting a little bit here, I'm curious, we've talked a bit about avian influenza and biosecurity risks to poultry and birds specifically, but what other risks are out there specifically circulating around Iowa? Are there other viruses or infections that producers should be aware of?
Well, and Roger, I think you might have a better handle on this than I do, but certainly our farmers are keenly aware that they need to be more than ever aware of what's happening around them, because the impact can be so quick and so devastating. But I don't know if I could red flag any issue in particular other than the ones we've been highlighting that I would say rise up above the rest. Olivia.
Yeah, I think that infectious disease, it's a plays a burden, and it's something that farmers, and ranchers of all types, in Iowa and across the country, work diligently day in, day out to do the best they can to protect the health and well-being of their animals. That's part of being a farmer, and work diligently to do that. And then there's some of these disease threats that, that's why we're talking about HPI, because that's here and now, and it's a very significant thing that impacts not only animal health but commerce, and all that, and that all comes back to roost, so to speak. And so there's other diseases. Another one that's significant in the swine world, as an example, that there's certain types of diseases that are considered foreign animal diseases. Okay, and foreign animal diseases are significant not only because they can be highly pathogenic and things like that, but they also impact commerce and trade, and that's why they kind of raise to a higher level. And so, well, in the bird world, HPAI is one of those, and that's why it's, in addition to its pathogenicity, is a significant issue. And then in the pig world, there's a virus called African swine fever that, again, is one of these diseases that's considered a foreign animal disease. It's fortunate, it's not in the U.S. Or Canada. Actually, never has been in the U.S. But it has been in the Dominican. And so there was an outbreak in Asia and so on that started 2018, 2019, kind of in that time frame, impacted that continent very significantly as it got into the commercial pigs in Asia, and then was brought over, or was an inadvertent introduction in the Dominican Republic. And so that's pretty, close to home. And so those sorts of threats are unquestionably, I think, on producers' minds. They're aware, they understand. There's tremendous support and efforts going on as it relates to by the USDA Department of Agriculture, by the folks that are inspecting things coming into the country, as it relates to whether that's products or travelers, inadvertently bringing products that they aren't aware, are a problem. And so that's a very active thing that happens each and every day at the border and airports across the country that are doing their best to help to keep it out. And then people within the country, within the producers, are doing their best to say, how do they avoid such risks more locally on things that they can control? So it's really a collective effort between kind of large scale things happening by USDA and federal authorities at the border and our ports and airports, as well as things that are certainly top of mind for the country and at our level of our state. And I know one thing that Secretary Nag will refer to, things as like as relates to state of preparedness. It's like, well, we're working each day to be prepared a little bit more today than we were yesterday. And I think that's all very much true and happening, that we're learning and continuing to do the best we can to improve. But the threats themselves, they're, as mentioned earlier, they're not going away. And in the world we live in today, I don't see that that issue changing. And as we continue to have to up our game to do the best that we can to maintain the health and well-being of our livestock and poultry in the state and country.
I think Roger's making some excellent points and how important that is. And, those are things that we shouldn't forget. The headlines have been dominated recently about our public servants and the role our government plays, because we're trying to figure out the right path to move ahead with the government and the shutdown and the central employees. So it's an excellent reminder about how important these services are, and so many of the folks are of course labeled as essential in this world, but the entire team effort it takes to deal with biosecurity issues can't be ignored. And we really want to value the public service that we're providing in this area, and with some very heavy, daunting tasks in front of them under very challenging conditions. So we certainly want to show our appreciation for those who are boots on the ground on biosecurity issues.
Absolutely. Just zooming out for a moment here, in terms of Iowa's livestock and crop industries across the state, How prepared are these industries to prevent and also respond to major biosecurity threats such as avian influenza or emerging plant diseases? Are there still gaps in Iowa's overall preparedness of these issues?
Well, it's a constantly changing picture, right? I'm reminded of that as my our combine is going through the field, and my neighbors' combines are going through the field. Tremendously dusty crop this year because of the disease pressures that we faced, that we haven't faced in many, many years, particularly this year. So it's an evolving picture. And all the more reason for us to up our efforts on preparedness side of things, because if if we keep in mind that our picture is probably going to be constantly changing, that we're not going to be able to take a snapshot and expect that snapshot to look the same as it will in a year's time or 2 years time. I think that what tells us that the efforts that we're putting in place to be prepared, to be resilient, to be nimble in responding to crisis situations, that those are only going to go up. So something for us to keep in mind. And we've had plenty of reminders of that as well these past few years, because we've been through a lot of changes just over the past half decade.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I think it's an ever evolving situation of what's happening locally and globally. The world's definitely not getting any. It seems to get smaller every day, and we're a piece of that. And as like Aaron said, I would just echo that. It's an evolving situation, and we certainly reserve the right to learn and improve by what our experiences have been. And I think there's all kinds of great examples of that. Yep, it's certainly better today than it was a year or 2 years ago, so on and so forth. But there's a lot of work to do, mainly because it's like the world's continuing to evolve and change, and we need to be a part of that to stay ahead of it.
Absolutely. Kind of staying on this broader, more just looking at Iowa as a whole track here, I'm curious, how transparent is Iowa's agricultural industries and state agencies with the public when biosecurity incidents do occur?
I'll just comment from my perspective. I think when we enjoy the opportunity. We work very closely with both our state, they're the diagnostic lab. We work very closely with our state and federal, veterinary medical in that space, and the state veterinary medical officials. That's housed, within the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship. And I would say, from my perspective, it's very transparent about when there's issues of high consequence that are happening. Is that they're very judicious about making the public aware of what's happening, but doing it in a way that also protects the confidentiality of the individuals, and that's really important too. So that it's like the public is aware, but then the people most locally impacted, that actually can impact their own operations or their neighbors. They're very everybody's in the know locally, but I would say from a public standpoint are very transparent about what's happening in a very timely way, and I think they take that responsibility and very seriously.
Yeah, it is not a task that we can take for granted, right? We want to be as transparent as we possibly can about our readiness, about our efforts to prepare, and our efforts to respond. And we need to do so in a responsible way so that our producers are being valued and respected. But we in order to have a secure food system, we need to have as much transparency as we possibly can, so that all proper information is being shared in the timeliest of manners, so that we know all the information that's available to us. We know how to act on it. So that transparency doesn't happen just when we've got a major issue that involves immediate response, but that transparency should be taking place through the entire food system as we prepare and try to make ourselves more resilient.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Kind of in tandem with that, what are some of these systems that are in place that are to ensure communities are informed and protected when incidents like this do occur? Are there certain systems that are in place for that?
One comment, or I'll just start and let Aaron go, is on for that particular question, was the like as an example with this AI thing or avian influenza. So essentially, all like the U.S. has the most robust avian influenza surveillance program in the world, and essentially all of the commercial scale turkey, egg laying, and broiler premises are monitored for avian influenza on a routine basis as part of what's called it's called the National Poultry Improvement Plan H5 H7 monitored certification, and essentially all commercial scale uh, commercial egg layer, commercial meat turkey, and then commercial meat broiler are participants in that national program. That's it's a voluntary program, but essentially all commercial scale producer participants are in it, and they're monitored on a routine basis that demonstrates active surveillance that demonstrates evidence of freedom of disease on an ongoing basis, and that's happening all the time, and that's separate from and outside of when there is an incident. Then that is more intense surveillance, not only on the affected farms, but then all the farms that are around that particular premises with what's called control zones. And those are part of the foreign animal disease response. And all of that is being actively directed when those instances occur via the state animal health official and USDA working cooperatively.
Now, all this has to happen in an environment that we get a lot of feedback from our consumers that they want to know more about where their food is grown and how it's grown and what the impacts are for their families. So all these transparency efforts and are within that context, that we want people to be involved in the food that they eat and their food systems that they're a part of, that we're all a part of. And having that transparency is essential to build that trust between farmers and consumers, between farmers and our communities that we grow in, and our entire Iowa economy.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Another question for you both is, I'm curious, to what extent is Iowa balancing the need for rapid, large-scale food production with the risks that come from concentrated systems that may be more vulnerable to diseases? What does that balance look like?
Yeah, that's a great question, Olivia. I don't know if there's a single answer, but it relates back to your previous question about transparency, and we find that more and more people want to be connected to their food and to the systems that bring them their food, whether that is a local restaurant or a local grocery store or a large chain or the larger system overall. Building avenues to connect farmers with their community, with the people they feed in their community, only help build that bridge so that we can understand the real issues that take place within our entire food system. And we've got a long ways to go. We made some headway in order to not only, well, it's a twofold system, right? One is we want to know how to deal with the larger system that has certain risks when it comes to biosecurity, certain risks when it comes to a reliable, resilient food system. At the same time, we need to build our alternative systems where farmers are feeding their community and feeding the institutions with their community, feeding the citizens within their community, and provide a path for that scale of farming as well. So many of our young and beginning farmers in Iowa are in the food system because they want to feed their local community. They want a direct connection to their consumer and to the institutions in their community, their schools, their food banks in their community. We've made some strides in that, but we've taken some major steps backward in that regard too. And in Iowa, we've done a exemplary job in some ways of connecting our local farmers with their local communities. We have a robust food hub system. We have some of the best farm markets in the country are here in Iowa. But we know that the vast majority of those who of the processing of the food we grow in Iowa, our markets for what we grow in Iowa, are controlled by just a few. So building a more diverse marketplace will help farmers not only on providing alternative markets and profitable markets, but that diversity in our food system should lead to a more resilient system that can respond to real biosecurity issues as well. So we've got a long ways to go in that regard. What gives me encouragement is we have so many innovative young people who are entering into agriculture because they want to make connection. And can we find a path to build off that innovation, build off that energy, and build off that dynamic of feeding our communities? That's the real challenge for us. We've made some strides, but we've taken some steps backward recently as well. So that's the real challenge we face, though.
Roger, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I don't think I'd have a lot to add. I mean, I think, Iowa has a long history of being leaders in food production, big and small. And I'm fully confident, as Aaron mentioned about in the promise of the future, and it's very exciting for me. I being working at Iowa State in and around obviously the College of Vet Med and the College of Agriculture there, is that, as Aaron mentioned, I mean, there's a lot of very talented young people that have an interest in getting involved in agriculture and animal agriculture, maybe as well, and in the scope of food production up and down. I mean, I think it's from my perspective, that's always very refreshing to see the young talent that are looking for a way to get involved and stay involved in agriculture as they're just entering their careers. And the great part about agriculture is it's very diverse, and there's all kinds of opportunities, whether that's feeding and focusing on local markets as well as other markets and opportunities that are feeding the country and abroad. And again, just Iowa has a long history of being leaders in agriculture and animal agriculture as well. And I'd be fully optimistic that with the talent that's going into it, that will continue to evolve and see a way to continue and expand that leadership because of the very natural resources. We're very blessed to have some of the best natural resources in the world, and it's food production is something that food and fuel production is something that we can do very well in our state.
Absolutely. Kind of continuing on with that, I'm curious. I believe you both touched on this some, but just to ask this more formally, what are some of the current investments that are being made by producers and state agencies to strengthen biosecurity measures throughout Iowa?
Yeah, I think Roger, you might have more complete answer than I have on that in particular. Again, it's an evolving picture, right? We've had a lot to respond to, and some resources have been, in particular, in response to certain threats we've had to biosecurity, and the other investments are ongoing investments that have to be made in order to make sure that we are prepared, that we can step up and address and be flexible to address the changing environment. But Roger, you might have a better handle on the particular investments that we see in Iowa and where that fits into the large picture, even in agriculture as a whole.
Sure. And so just a couple things I would say is that there's the vast majority are investments being made in this space are being done by the industry participants themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Of what can they do to protect and better respond to the evolving animal health related threats that's impacting the health and well-being of their animals and their business on a day-to-day basis. In addition to that, at a state level, there's unquestionably been some investments by the state to say how can we as a state investments of the role that the state may play in helping support the activities and well-being of agriculture and animal agriculture in particular. And so as one of those, as an example, is that so I have the good fortune to work with a great group of people at the Iowa State Veterinary Diagnostic Lab located in Ames, Iowa. And the state has just put a very substantive investment in that's still ongoing in the building and construction of a new state-of-the-art veterinary diagnostic lab in our state. And it's an investment in infrastructure that will serve and better animal agriculture in our state and this country for decades to come. And I just feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to live and work in a state that values that, and we're well known for our core focus. We do all animals, but the core focus is on supporting food animal agriculturalists, and just proud to be in a state that values agriculture and puts such investments, because unquestionably, our team there kind of plays a behind the scenes role of helping support the animal health related needs as relates to diagnostic and surveillance for food animal agriculturists.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Just keeping an eye on the clock here, we just have a few minutes left. So just for a final question to wrap up on, for Iowa producers, whether they are leading large operations, smaller farm operations, what are some resources they should look to when trying to make their operations more safe against biosecurity threats? And what are some of those initial steps they should take to protect their farms?
Yeah, that's a great question, Olivia. I think we've hit on some of the answers already, but we rely on our producer networks to communicate with one another, to identify challenges, to look forward beyond the current situation. So those producer networks are extremely important. Our fine institutions, we are blessed to have here in the state of Iowa, Iowa State University, and the work going on there has a lot of resources as well, and certainly the USDA investments, some at the vet lab and other places in Iowa are extremely important. We know as farmers that we have to be independent, gritty folks, but we also have to know that we can only deal with issues like food security and biosecurity by working together. And that's with our public institutions, with our producer networks, and with our consumer networks as well. We need to be all on the same page to deal with that and develop all those resources moving ahead. Roger, I hope that's fits into the work that you're doing there.
Oh yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's I would just echo those comments. Is that the all of the different, there's a number of different what I would consider Iowa farm community or Iowa farm commodity based organizations. Some are broad that go across species. And some are, species specific, but those they're essentially producer associations are a wealth of resources. In addition to, as was talked about, Iowa State and their local extension service and agents, and also the local veterinarian, the local veterinarian is a key part, of the livestock producer, poultry producer's operation. And they're, of course, another key, very local, trusted partner that's part of the farmers' specific operations. So we're fortunate to be, again, in a state and region with good veterinarians, good extension, good producer associations. So I think no shortage of opportunities for good information that's available.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for being a part of our panel today and being involved with Iowa Ideas. And thank you so much to all of our attendees who sat in on this session today. We appreciate it. Today is the first day of our 2-day conference, Iowa Ideas. We will have sessions running throughout the day tomorrow as well. Thank you again to our sponsor for the session, ICT Midwest, for helping us keep these sessions and Iowa Ideas free for all to register. And again, thank you to our 2 panelists. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you much, Olivia. This conversation is so important, and taking the lead on it is extremely valuable service. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Have a good rest of your day.